your previous speakers have, spoken to some of the issues I would throw more light on. But I would just like to take it from the top. So a budget is basically supposed to be a planning tool for development. It's one that, government uses to communicate their political commitments, aspirations, right, into how resources will be raised and spent. A budget should reflect the needs and preferences of society. And your national budgets are supposed to be congruent with your national development plans. And Nigeria went through a painstaking, expensive process of, developing a national development plan that was supposed to run from 2021 to 2025. Clearly articulated policy objectives, right, that over those 5 years, if resources were deployed, adequately, efficiently, we had set out some development goals we're going to achieve by 2025. But the way and manner in which we have allocated resources over that period does not suggest that those clearly identified, clearly articulated development goals would be achieved. And why do I say this? Even if the framers of the Constitution granted the National Assembly the powers of the purse, the appropriation powers, I would not think that it was within their imagination that there would ever be any time when the National Assembly hijacks the executive budget proposal of the executive. Why do I say this? A budget of 27.5 trillion naira was submitted to the National Assembly, I think in November last year. And in the process of reviewing the budget, a budget of about 28.7 trillion naira was passed. When we took a cursory glance at that budget, it would seem that the National Assembly had included over 7,400 projects, right, with a cumulative value of 2.2 trillion naira into the budget proposal that was submitted by the executive. Now, at face value, it would seem that the budget proposal that was submitted to it was raised by just 1.2 trillion naira. But in actual fact, the National Assembly created fiscal space for that 2.2 trillion naira by reducing the debt service, the proposal for debt service that was submitted by 220 billion, and reducing the budget proposal of government enterprises by 850 billion, creating that additional 1 trillion to the 1.2 trillion that it had raised the budget by. Now, if you look at the nature of these insertions, these are, like your previous guests have said, these were insertions that, number one, are outside the scope and the mandate of most of the agencies where these projects were placed to be implemented, are outside the scope of the federal government in terms of, is duly assigned roles and functions. So you see the federal government trying to drill boreholes in local communities. You see the federal government trying to install street lights. There's a new obsession for the installation of street lights and boreholes across the entire budget. And you wonder, you drive along the length and breadth of the entire country, and there is no evidence that the resources that we have spent in installing, street lights and boreholes over the last 3 years, right, are resources that we have gotten value for money. You see the federal government building community town halls. You see the federal government buying vehicles for traditional rulers. In fact, it looks like the budget has now become a tool for solving family problems. People are using public funds, mind you, the bulk of which is borrowed, to tar roads to their personal houses. People are using public funds to to actualize pledges that they have made in church. I mean, the Federal Cooperative College of G River has an allocation to build an Anglican church. You have agencies of government that have allocations as high as 500 million naira to build ultra-modern VIP toilets. And you ask yourself, how does this in any way suggest that all of these resources, like I had said earlier, mind you, the bulk of which is borrowed, will result in any kind of development? The answer is a complete no. Now, if we come to some of the issues raised by the senator who made that allegation. Now, what was behind all of this was that usually year in, year out, the budget is usually segmented into like 4 main sections. So you have statutory allocations. These are statutory transfers to specific agencies of government. So agencies like the NDDC, like the Northeast Development Commission, the National Assembly, TED Fund, and the likes. You now have the allocations to ministries, departments, and agencies of government. You have allocations to government-owned enterprises. Then you now have a block vote for TED Fund. Now, what happened with this year's budget was the 25 trillion naira that the senator had alluded to was the allocation for breakdowns of the MDAs of government, inclusive of the NDDC, the NEDC, the Public Complaints Commission. But what accounted for that 3.3 trillion naira that, in quotes, he said was padded was the budget of the GOEs, the National Assembly's budget, the National Judicial Council's budget, INEC's budget, and TED Fund. And this was because there was no, and up to date, there is no breakdown of the budget of these entities. And one of the core principles of budgeting is that the budget must be comprehensive, and the breakdowns, details of every item that would be appropriated be listed in the budget. How do you approve a 700 billion naira envelope for TED Fund without seeing the breakdown? We've been, allocating huge funds to TED Fund in the last couple of years. Never have we seen the breakdown of the TED Fund when the president is presenting the budget before the National Assembly. Ditto the National Judicial Council. So how do you know that resources have been, effectively allocated or efficiently allocated to attain some of your clearly constructed, policy objectives or development goals? The answer is complete. It's a complete